We'd like to apologize for any delay there might be. This is going to be our first video podcast for the Red and Black, and if the screen is lagging a little bit behind what we say, bear with us. It shouldn't be longer than about a half a second delay.
Yes, and we say that because today we're going to get a little insider with you. We're going to kind of break down this Georgia defense and the different kinds of things you might see under Jeremy Pruitt.
I know you guys have heard us say a lot of times in our writing and in our podcasts that Georgia's going to be moving to a multiple defensive set. A lot of you have heard that. You might know what a 3-4 is, what a 4-3 is, but you might not know the ins and outs of the defense. Cody and I, we're not experts, but we have studied this for quite some time, and from what we've ascertained being around the team and covering football, we decided that'd be nice to kind of show you guys what we know and what you should know and the basics around this Georgia defense for fall.
And then, obviously, you know, once you've watched this, you have any questions, feel free to tweet at us. I'm at Cody Pace.
And I'm at Nick Suss. Both of them are spelled exactly like they sound. You can find them on the Red and Black, and of course, read all of our other football stuff. We're not only talkers.
And we'll be up in the press box for G-Day, so if you can't go to the game or whatever, you can follow us for live tweeting. So I guess without further ado, we'll go ahead and move into our presentation and, you know, start getting these guys through this Georgia defense and kind of what they should expect to see.
Yeah, as we kind of talked about, this is going to be called Getting Defensive. We're going to be explaining what the Georgia defense is going to look like. Of course, we'd like to acknowledge that any graphics that we have in this slideshow come to us with permission of SB Nation, and one photograph is via our Red and Black photography archive. Just saying. Okay, so this is a look at a basic 3-4 defense. A lot of you might remember this game. We're not going to show you any of the painful memories. Let's just take a look at what we have.
Wait, hold on. But before we move on, is that the end zone?
I think that is the end zone.
Whew. I'll give you all a moment to cringe. Okay, moving forward.
Okay, go back to that for a second, Cody. This is what a 3-4 defense is. I'd like to draw on the screen for a little bit, but we might not be the best at it. If you look at this defense, it's a 3-4. So pretty much what that means, you've got 3 down linemen right here. At that time, I think they were Garrison Smith, John Jenkins, and I can't remember who the third lineman was at that time. His family's very famous. I just can't remember his name. It doesn't matter. And then, of course, you have 4 linebackers right there, there, and there, making it a 3-4 defense. 3 down linemen, 4 linebackers. That is what a 3-4 defense means. The other 4 players on the field are a cornerback, another cornerback, and 2 safeties, a strong safety and a free safety. So if we go to the next slide now, we can look at, this is what Todd Grantham, as the defensive coordinator last year's base 3-4 would have looked like. As we get further in here, we're going to explain that a base 3-4 is very rare. We very, very rarely actually see it. But before we move on to the more complex stuff, we'd really like to explain to you what a base 3-4 would look like. So if you go through it, we're going to start on the defensive line. Your 3 down linemen last year were Ray Drew, Garrison Smith, and Sterling Bailey.
And that all changed a little bit. We're not saying this was any definite every play. This is just kind of the generic stuff.
Oftentimes, Chris Mays was on the field instead of Sterling Bailey, and oftentimes Garrison Smith moved out to end against pass sets, but again, we'll get there. Then, of course, you had your linebackers. More often than not, your 4 linebackers on the field, Amarlo Herrera and Ramik Wilson, were covering your inside backers. Jordan Jenkins was a strong side linebacker, which means he lined up on the strong side of the offense, which we can denote here with a tight end who is right there. And then Leonard Floyd was on the weak side of the offense, where you can see there is no tight end. Your secondary in this defense, and again, the secondary was much maligned last year. There were a lot of people moving in and out, but you had Damian Swan and Shaq Wiggins towards the end of the year playing cornerback. And then at the beginning of the year, Josh Harvey Clemens and Trey Matthews were your safeties. Josh Harvey Clemens playing the strong safety, Trey Matthews the free safety, but both of them suffered injuries and suspensions and the like, so they weren't on the field all the time. Now, if we move to Jeremy Pruitt's 3-4 for a second, same lineup, as you can see, against the same offense, but Garrison Smith has graduated, and obviously Josh Harvey Clemens is off the field. because of suspension issues and dismissal. But the middle of the field stays the same. Amarlo Herrera and Ramik Wilson are still the middle linebackers, and that's probably the strongest part of this defense, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think we've written a lot about that recently, just especially with Ramik. They were number 1 and 3 respectively, with Ramik being number 1 in the SEC, Herrera third in tackles, which is huge in the SEC especially. So I don't think that's a concern for this defense.
Now moving to the secondary, Damian Swann and Shaq Wiggins are still here as corners, and Damian Swann is likely going to be playing the field corner. Shaq Wiggins, the sideline corner. We'll get more into that later. Just bear that in mind. At linebacker, Jordan Jenkins and Leonard Floyd are still here on the outside. Jordan Jenkins still playing the strong side. Leonard Floyd still playing the weak side. At safety, Trey Matthews and Quincy Mauger are here, but we may very well see Corey Moore playing safety, and we might see some Brendan Langley. Right now we have Mauger written in because he got the most playing time at the end of the season, but that will change as we go further into the podcast.
And I think we could also see a little bit of J.J. Green here and there. I know he has been working at it. Obviously, I think that would be a big shift for him coming from running back, but don't be surprised if we see a little bit of that.
And then the defensive line is where the most changes are being made. Of course, here are Moore and Langley, as we just said. But the defensive line is... Ray Drews is working in the middle a lot this year. And of course, we're not going to see a true 3-4 very often, but we've seen Ray Drew working in the middle. And on the edge, we've had Sterling Bailey and we've had James Deloach working at defensive end. One working at 5 technique and one more working kind of as a 5-eye, which is a 5 technique lines up on the tackle and a 5-eye kind of on the tackle's outside shoulder. It's not a true 5, but it's closer to a 5 than most. And we'll just give you a second to digest this. We know this is a lot of information, but this is a lot of stuff you probably already know. This is what Georgia's defense is expected to be. But here's the thing. Last year, the 3-4 wasn't always what Georgia ran. If you go to the next slide, you'll see this is kind of more what it looked like. This is just a base 3-4, but more often than not, Leonard Floyd would come off the field. Or no, I'm sorry. We'll skip to that in a second. Ray Drew would move over to the weak side, and Garrison Smith to the strong side. And as we said before, Chris Mays would come in as a nose tackle because he's a little bit bigger of a guy. But then Leonard Floyd would come off the field in favor of a star player, which Josh Harvey Clemens occupied that role last year. And Josh Harvey Clemens would be replaced by Corey Moore. And Trey Matthews would often get hurt, so Quincy Mauger would come on the field. But I know, I'll slow down for a second. Cody, what are you saying here? What's the main difference between the base D and what just happened to this D?
I think the biggest difference, obviously, is let's see if we have our pen tool up, just so you guys can kind of keep track of what I'm talking about. Is right here when you have Josh Harvey Clemens moving up. It was kind of an interesting move for me last year having him as the star because it was almost replacing a linebacker in Leonard Floyd with more of a true linebacker in Josh Harvey Clemens. Yeah. But it was asking him to play more of a cornerback position. For those of you who don't know, a star for Grantham was a hybrid position between outside linebacker and a nickel corner, which is the third corner that comes on the field. So I think that was the biggest difference. I think it took a little bit of talent out of the back of the defense here.
I agree.
And, so I think that was the biggest difference for me. And then obviously, maybe one move I do like is with Chris Mays up here, you get a little bit more size.
I think Chris Mays is a guy that he didn't really show out too well last year. I know people like him and Mike Thornton were kind of criticized for not playing big enough. But he is a big man that played a lot more like John Jenkins did a year before than Garrison Smith did. Garrison Smith, of course, built a lot like a defensive end, like a Ray Drew, both of them preferring run-stopping and pass-rushing to coming up the middle and eating up blocks, and Chris Mays is that kind of a guy. But when you're talking about this true base defense, it all comes down to what these guys can do, what can happen in the defensive backfield, because when you take both Trey Matthews due to injury off the field and move Josh Harvey Clemens closer to the line of scrimmage, your back end becomes very vulnerable.
And I think that's what we saw a lot of times last season was that back end. I couldn't even count on my hands the number of times I think Quincy Mauger was out on the field and just was not in position, was not playing over top the way he should. And you're going to see that out of a freshman, I think, especially. I mean, Trey Matthews was able to make up for it a little bit more when he was on the field just because he's so physically gifted in ways that Quincy Mauger just is not. But I feel like there were a lot of times where Quincy Mauger was just out of position. And
if you want the best evidence of it, go back and watch the 99-yard touchdown in the Gator Bowl that Nebraska threw. It was Quincy Mauger and Corey Moore both out of position, and Nebraska made Georgia pay. Now, of course, just as if Todd Grantham doesn't have a true 3-4, neither is Jeremy Pruitt. Let's take a look back at the 3-4 defense we showed you a second ago. Here's something that's going to be different. Again, Leonard Floyd may come off the field, and J.J. Green is occupying the star position. We're going to talk a lot about the star position in a minute. And so let's just keep that in your back pocket for a second. But, Cody?
I was just going to say the star position is very important in Jeremy Pruitt's defense, and we will give you a very good comparison of J.J. Green as to why that star position is important. But we'll get to that a little bit later.
Yeah, another thing that's very possible is that Jordan Jenkins will put his hand in the dirt. Instead of being a strong side linebacker, he could be a weak side defensive end. And we'll see Leonard Floyd quite possibly fill in for him as a linebacker in what looks like a 3-3-5 defense here.
Which I'll go ahead and point out now that I think this defense already has a lot of advantage over the Grantham version of this that we saw because, maybe your most physically gifted player in Leonard Floyd is not taken off the field. He's still there. And you have J.J. Green as a true extra defensive back when you need someone in coverage. When Josh Harvey Clemens' coverage was definitely not his strong suit.
Of course, many of you might have noticed that this is red font for these guys. We would like to remind you this is speculation. We have not seen this look firsthand because we haven't been on the field when they've worked a full defense. This is just what we expect. And also, it's very possible that Leonard Floyd is actually the one that puts his hand in the dirt. And Jordan Jenkins stays at his natural position. That is orange font because it's more speculation, but we don't quite know the machinations of what's going to happen with these two linebackers. Towards the end of the podcast, we'll show you why it's kind of tricky to define them right now. But just keep in mind that these guys are probably the hardest to predict, but the more often they're both on the field, the better the Georgia defense will probably run.
Absolutely.
Now, another thing, we're not going to try and trick you too much, but here's where the hybrid comes in. The hybrid defense that we've been talking about a lot sometimes involves completely changing the defense and not having 3 down linemen, not having 4 linebackers, not having 5 defensive backs, adhering to something that just fits with the offense on the field instead of the defense you want to run. If you'll notice, I'll telestrate for a second again here with our pen. We've got 4 receivers here, 2 slot receivers. And when you are in a 5 defensive back formation with 4 receivers on the field, the offense has a mismatch. It might sound like the defense has the mismatch because there's still 1 more defensive back than receiver, but that makes it very, very difficult to have over-the-top coverage if you run man with 4 players and you don't have enough zone to run it with just 5 players. So what often's going to happen is, again, Leonard Floyd very well may come off the field, and Damian Swann will take this 4th defensive back position that is called the money position. Cody loves the fact that it's called money.
I absolutely do. I hope Trey Matthews plays the money this year.
And we'll see that, of course, Damian Swann is a starter at corner, which makes it complicated. So Cody, who's going to do it?
Who's going to do it? Who's going to do it? I'm sorry, I lost track. Oh,
this
of
guy.
course, Brendan Langley.
This guy, Brendan
I lost
Langley.
track of where we were for a second.
Brendan Langley's going to do it. So let's move Brendan Langley over. Ooh. And, of course, now that you have Brendan Langley playing your field corner, Shaq Wiggins playing your sideline corner, you don't have much meat on the field side of the field. So what's going to happen is a linebacker, likely Ramik Wilson, who's your more athletic linebacker, will move over closer to the strong side of the field. And a Marlo Herrera will move over to a true middle linebacker position. Now what you'll notice is Jordan Jenkins is your biggest player on the right side of your screen. So he will likely be replaced with Ray Drew, who will likely be replaced with Chris Mays to give a bigger defensive line. You may have noticed that it's gone from red to green. What does that mean, Cody? That means we've entered the rabbit hole of speculation.
Speculation on speculation on speculation up in here.
Yeah, there's a lot of guessing that has to come on, but a lot of you see Chris Mays and you think, as we noted earlier, he wasn't all that strong last year, and there is a freshman coming in named Lamont Gaylord that very well could play that position. He's noted in purple because purple means sheer guessing. We have no way of knowing how he's going to look in college, but he may be on the field in a set like this.
And I do want to say, just because we're throwing out the word speculation, don't immediately turn us off. There may be a few changes here or there, but this is generally speaking the defense you're going to see with only minor changes here or there.
You know, where they're lined up, instead of being a true zero nose tackle lined up directly over the center, you might see a shade on a guard or something along those lines. We're not saying that we're making things up. Thank you for that clarification, Cody. Now, a lot of you might notice that Sterling Bailey is still on the field here in this set, and a lot of you might disagree with that because Sterling Bailey is not Leonard Floyd or Jordan Jenkins, and both of them are off the field right now. So we add Jordan Jenkins and Leonard Floyd into this set, possibly in what I like to call a reasoned conjecture. But when we've gotten into the range of reasoned conjecture, you know I've...
Stop.
You're right, this is getting too complicated. Let's show him a GIF. Okay, a lot of you might recognize this play as Trey Mason running all over the Florida State defense for a touchdown in the national championship. Again, we'd like to thank Pete Volk of SB Nation for this GIF. But a lot of you, if you will notice the very beginning of this GIF, you can take a look at what defense Florida State is running against this Auburn offense. If we can get back to the beginning here. They have two down linemen. That's the first thing you can notice. When we get back to the top, take a look at the defensive linemen, and you will see that only two people have their hand in the dirt. There. Now, another thing worth noting, they have four linebackers on the field still. So you may only have two down linemen, but there are four linebackers standing up. One pretty close to the line of scrimmage, one very close to the line of scrimmage, and then two playing true inside linebacker roles. The only other player you can see on the screen is the star position, which we're about to get pretty in-depth with. His name is Lamarcus Joyner, and he was Florida State's best defender last year, quite easily, in my opinion. But yes, we're going to move on here. This is what that defense looked like. Press the arrow once, Cody. Auburn brought a player in motion at the beginning of the play, so I'm just doing that to signify this, but this is what it looked like. You had two down defensive linemen, both playing aces, which was a defensive formation where you have two down linemen in A-gaps, which pretty much means between the center and guard. You had four linebackers, a strong side, a weak side, and two inside. Two corners, two safeties, and a star position. Now, despite the fact that Auburn was a known running team, Florida State still managed to stack the box with five defensive backs on the field. That is because of the star player. As I mentioned, his name was Lamarcus Joyner. In Jeremy Pruitt's defense, this star player plays like an outside linebacker, despite being sized like an outside back. Instead of in Grantham's defense, how'd you put it, Cody? The star was...
The star was a hybrid linebacker almost. He was a linebacker playing a defensive back. Granted, Josh Harvey Clemens was probably the best guy to play that position as far as how Grantham wanted to use it as a hybrid corner linebacker because of his physical abilities, but generally speaking, you aren't going to find many guys that fit that.
So if we go to the next slide, we'll talk about that a little more. But yeah, the star often plays in the backfield. He works like a linebacker instead of being sized like a linebacker, but he's sized like a defensive back. So move on. We'll focus on the star position. Last year, Josh Harvey Clemens was the star, but this year it's going to be a truer, more agile defensive back player. And right now, this spring, the player that's been working it, believe it or not, has been J.J. Green. So you see J.J. Green's name pops up there. For those of you who aren't in the loop yet, J.J. Green has switched from running back to defensive player this year, and he's been working with the first team a lot. He's looked very good this spring.
It seems like Jeremy Pruitt has really grabbed onto him in his comparisons to Lamarcus Joyner and has really made him the star.
Because if you look at the next slide, just compare this for a second. Lamarcus Joyner was 1 inch shorter than J.J. Green. J.J. Green is 1 pound lighter than Lamarcus Joyner, and their 40-yard dash times are very comparable. Now, that being said, Lamarcus Joyner's 40-yard dash time is what he ran at the NFL Combine. J.J. Green ran that in high school. But look at the accolades that LaMarcus Joyner earned at Florida State. He was two-time first-time ACC. He was a first-team All-American last year on the undefeated national championship team, and he led the team in sacks and was second in tackles with 69. That shows just how important this star position is and how much confidence Jeremy Pruitt looks to have in J.J. Green. But, of course, the star isn't the only player on the field. Let's start from the middle. Cody, you want to take the slide?
All right. So, obviously, we have some color representations here. Here are your linebackers. Go ahead and get all these going at once here. Clearly, the linebackers are the easiest. You're going to have a Marlowe, you're going to have Ramik Wilson, you're going to have Jordan, and you're going to have Leonard Floyd. That's going to be solid. You're going to see a lot of these four guys on the field as long as they can make it work at the same time. That's just the most common thing. Now you look at the defensive backs. You already have J.J. Green on the field.
Colored orange, of course.
All right, we'll let that go ahead and transition in and start looking at the names. Damian Swann. Yeah, you'll probably see Damian Swann in that role, probably in that field corner spot, with Corey Moore probably in the strong safety, with Trey Matthews in the free safety as he did last year, and then Shaq Wiggins as the sideline corner. And then you move into your defensive line, which I think this is probably where the most question marks are right now. Currently, it sounds to me like you have Ray Drew and James DeLoach. Now, a lot of you are going to remember James DeLoach as the outside linebacker, but I would like to point out that James DeLoach was a healthy 265 pounds as an outside linebacker, so don't think he's going to get outmanned by these offensive linemen coming out of a three-point stance.
And for those of you that don't know why you remember James DeLoach and you don't remember him as the outside linebacker, some of you might remember him for being arrested just a month ago, along with Trey Matthews, Uriah LeMay, and John Taylor.
Which again, creates all sorts of problems as far as the personnel, just to quickly illustrate without taking too much time, you look at, obviously, Trey and James being the biggest problems there. This is probably going to be Quincy. I'm not even going to try to write Quincy in this pen. This could be anybody. We really have no idea who could take that spot.
Sterling Bailey's been playing there a lot. We've had Toby Johnson playing there a lot. I don't know if a lot of you know who Toby Johnson is, but he's been working with the second team, which has been a lot with Sterling Bailey and with James DeLoach. So he's a guy that could fit in that spot. But of all these positions, Cody, where do you see the biggest problems resulting?
The biggest problems resulting? I would say my first problem would be with the defensive line. I think that's just my natural look, just because that's a little bit undersized, especially for those guys to be going up against these big bruisers that fall in here. Oftentimes your tackles here on the outsides are a little more athletic, but these guys here in the middle are going to be big guys. I'm not so sure how Ray Drew and James DeLoach match up against, especially some of these SEC guards and centers.
See, I have not many problems with this. I agree that that's going to be a tough matchup. But I look at Corey Moore right here, who, as we said, last year had some difficulties. Corey Moore's going into his senior year. You can't blame youth and inexperience on what happened to him last year. And I don't know if Corey Moore is a true strong safety in this defense that is supposed to stop the pass.
I would say that one thing we could see, again, pure speculation, is you could see Trey Matthews come down here into the strong safety side and have Quincy come in. Just in the sense of Quincy is a little bit younger. He's a little more athletic, I think, than Corey Moore is. So I think you could see that, but again, not much of an improvement.
And Cody's going to roll his eyes here, but I'm going to bring up my favorite recruit coming in this year with the class of 2014. There's a four-star athlete out of Brooks County High School named
Malcolm Parrish.
Malcolm Parrish. Thank you for saying my favorite player's name, Cody. Yeah, he very likely could fit as this free safety, and he very likely could. Steve Spurrier's shaking his head at me. He very likely could play the star position too when he comes in. So you got to remember people like him, people like Shadow Fentang coming in as the #1 rated JUCO corner.
Again, and we don't do this just to digress. We just want to kind of we're just trying to articulate the fact that this is not set in stone. But again, I think this is a pretty accurate assessment of what you're probably going to see, at least in the beginning.
But here's the thing. While the 3-4 defense is often ran against a spread offense and uses very zany blitz schemes to attack the offense, it isn't the only defense that Jeremy Pruitt is going to employ. There are other situations where you want 4 down linemen, obviously called a 4-man front, and most of you know that the base defense out of a 4-man front is called the 4-3. Now, of course, there's a 4-3 because you have 4 down linemen, you have 3 linebackers, and then your secondary looks pretty similar with 2 corners, a free safety, and a strong safety. Thank you for connecting the dots. Before we move on, we want to go through some definitions here. Remember these colors, because we're going to color code on the next slide so you can remember this. But
in fact, I think after we show you the next slide and kind of let you digest it for a minute, we'll come back to this one just to make sure.
That makes a lot of sense.
There's no confusion.
But a 3 technique and a 2 technique, those are 2 defensive linemen. A 3 technique pretty much means a defensive tackle is lined up on an offensive guard's outside shoulder. His inside shoulder corresponds closer to the center, his outside shoulder closer to the tackle. So if you are a 3 technique, you are effectively lined up in between a guard and a tackle, but closer to the guard. A 2 technique is very similar, except it's between a guard and a center, closer to the guard. There's 2 kinds of corners in a 4-3 defense, the field corner and the sideline corner, like we said before. Your field corner covers the wide side of the field. Your sideline corner covers the short side of the field. You've seen people in the NFL specialize in field corner versus sideline corner. It's not just a college thing. Nnamdi Asomugha made a big name for himself over in Oakland playing the sideline corner. There are a lot of guys that do this. And then you have your 3 linebackers, Sam, Will, and Mike. Just remember the letters they start with. Sam means strong, Will means weak, Mike means middle.
No, that's not any of their names, as it turns out. I was really disappointed. We don't have any of our linebackers. It's a shame.
There is Mike Thornton, but I don't think he wants to play middle linebacker.
I would hope not.
Yeah.
All right, so here again is that picture we told you that you would see. I would say that, again, we'll let you digest this for just a second, and now I will show you these terms one more time, and then Nick and I will also illustrate this for you very quickly.
I think we're going to start from the middle here. And the position that we've said from the very beginning is the most set in stone, your Mike position. And that's Amarlo Herrera. In a 4-3, Amarlo Herrera is the most equipped to play a true middle linebacker because he's not as athletic as Ramik Wilson, but he is a very talented run stopper. Not all that good against the pass, which is, again, why he probably shouldn't play the strong side. But he's a true Mike. Ramik Wilson will play your Sam in this defense. Again, remember that meant purple. And Leonard Floyd will play your Will, illustrated in pink. Do you think that's a fair assessment of what we have out of these linebackers, Cody?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I think Floyd and what you'll see a little bit later with Jordan Jenkins, the down lineman, that could switch. There are some things that could change. You may see Ramik Wilson move over to that Mike linebacker and then bring in another outside linebacker. I know Davin Bellamy has been talked about, and Jordan Jenkins told us today, actually, that he thinks Davin will get a little bit of playing time at the outside linebacker. So there are some things you could see. But
do you think we'll see Paris Bostic? For those of you not
I would be surprised.
Joke of the week! For those of you not in the loop, Paris Bostic has decided to transfer away from UGA.
I think Jeremy Pruitt would be surprised, too.
Let's move on to the defensive line. Your defensive ends here, we've moved Jordan Jenkins in as a weak side defensive end, and James DeLoach as a strong side defensive end. And then your 3 technique is Ray Drew, and your 2 technique is Sterling Bailey. We've heard a lot about Ray Drew moving to this 3 technique this spring.
Again, I'll just emphasize what we talked about earlier. With this being your guard, this being your tackle, he's going to line up right here on the outside shoulder. And that's why he's your 3 technique.
And then Bailey, inside shoulder. But yeah, we've heard a lot about Ray Drew playing this 3 technique. A lot of people were surprised because a lot of people thought in a 4-3 he'd be a true defensive end. But Jeremy Pruitt seems to like Ray Drew in this 3 technique, and also seems to like him on the 3rd team. Ray Drew has been moving around a lot this spring.
I think a lot of that has to do with the combination of of Jeremy Pruitt and Tracy Rocker. Rocker's a guy with a lot of NFL experience, and he's gonna put the guys that are gonna give him the most effort out there on the field. And if Ray Drew's, as Mark Richt would say, if Ray Drew's out there ho-humming around,
Yeah.
he's not going to get playing time. But ultimately, I think some of that's just motivational. I think you'll see a lot of Ray Drew this year. I do think you'll see a lot of Ray Drew even at this true defensive end. I think he'll play a little bit of both.
It's curious you bring up Rocker because Jordan Jenkins is a very curious case in this defense. Jordan Jenkins' position is currently being coached by Tracy Rocker.
Which I think, again, goes back to this everything we've been talking about here today, in that just with this defense, you may not have two outside linebackers a lot of the time, and you want to get Jordan Jenkins out there on the field. So I think that having him work with Rocker and putting his hand in the dirt is going to help him out.
And then Leonard Floyd has been working with Kevin Scherer, who has been in charge of the star position. So this defense, you're going to see a lot of players in unfamiliar roles. But that being said, the secondary is rather familiar. You got Damian Swan working the field, which is different. He worked the sideline under Grantham. But I think he's capable of covering the field. I think he's athletic enough.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And then Shaq Wiggins, you have playing this sideline corner with Trey Matthews and Corey Moore playing free and strong safety, respectively. We've talked about it before. We don't necessarily know how good these guys can be at safety. They had some struggles last year, but a year of new coaching and a year of more experience, these guys can become pretty reliable safeties.
Absolutely.
Now, just like with the 3-4, the biggest problem with a base 4-3 is that it's very rarely used. You never see a team line up in a true base 4-man front. So sometimes you have to change some things up. Sometimes Leonard Floyd will come off the field in favor of J.J. Green, just like in a 3-4 as you would move to a 3-3-5. And you would have to adjust Amarlo Herrera and Ramik Wilson accordingly. This is called a 4-2-5 defense. If you press that, there's our graphic. It's called a 4-2-5 defense. And if you look at the set, quite simply, it looks like a very, very good defense.
I think so. I think that there are a lot less holes with this, mainly because you're going to have these two guys who can pretty much work here and back. You have J.J. Green and Damian Swan can easily cover this area in here. You just look at this, and I think your most vulnerable area is going to be somewhere in here. And again, you've got Ramik Wilson and Marlo Herrera. You're not going to run against this. And with all these defensive backs here on the field, depending on the set, J.J. Green could be on the other side. There are a lot of things you could do. This is a defense that I think we'll see a lot of, and it's a hard-to-penetrate defense.
For those of you very familiar with college football, you'll recognize this 4-2-5 look as what TCU ran for most of its years under Gary Patterson. I think they still run it to this day, and it's why their defense was so stifling. And one of the things that's interesting about TCU's defense is they always are undersized. We've talked a lot in this podcast about how Georgia's defensive line's biggest problem is going to be it's undersized. This 4-2-5 defense kind of creates a safeguard against undersizedness because you put 5 defensive backs on the field and rely so much on your inside linebackers. And that being said, you look at James DeLoach on the field here, and no, you can go to the next slide. James DeLoach on the field creates a little bit of a situation because Cody talked to Jordan Jenkins today, and Jordan kind of told us why that 4-2-5 might not look like we just said.
And a lot of that had to do with the fact that he and Leonard Floyd, in fact, Leonard told me today that he and Jordan have been working with in a 3-point stance, which means on the line, about 50% of the time. And coaches have told them that they actually look better, look more explosive out of the 3-point stance. But we'll go ahead and let Jordan tell you himself.
Yeah, now playing out of a 3-point stance a little bit more, and it feels sort of back to the high school days of getting off from the 3-point, and the coaches are saying me and Leonard look better coming out of a 3-point than we do a 2-point, so we might do a mix of that in the fall or something like that.
So as you can see from what we've said in this entire presentation, there is a lot that has happened and can happen with this Georgia defense this spring. And in all likelihood, we will not see much of it this Saturday.
In fact, on Tuesday, Coach Mark Richt told us that the idea for Tuesday is just to keep it simple. A lot of that has to do with the fact that opponents scout spring games now. So you don't want to show too much of your defense and give a team like Clemson or South Carolina any kind of advantage going into the early season. So in fact, I think ultimately what you may see a lot of is that base 3-4 and that base 4-3 defense. I
don't even think we're going to see that base 4-3 defense. I think what you're going to see is, if you go back to the beginning of this slideshow, if you look at that picture of Georgia against Alabama, 3 men on the line of scrimmage, 4 linebackers behind him, 4 defensive backs. I think we'll see a little bit of the star position just so Kevin Sherrer doesn't start to feel bad about himself. I think he wants to feel like he has a purpose, and if the star's not on the field, he's just going to tell Leonard Floyd attaboy over and over again. Was it you that said Kevin Sherrer said his job is extremely easy when Leonard Floyd is his only coverage guy?
Yeah, pretty much. So when you're in charge of Leonard Floyd, you look good. So
yeah. So I think we're going to see a little bit of the star just so J.J. Green, who just returned to a red jersey and is healthy again, can play on the field to show off what he's learned this spring. But I don't think we'll see much. So we'd like to say one last thing. Thank you for watching this slideshow.
Especially for those of you who stuck it out through the whole thing. I hope you learned something about this Georgia defense from us.
Can I ask you something?
Go ahead.
If they didn't stick it out through the whole thing, how are they hearing this?
You know what? I'm just giving an extra thank you for those of you who did.
Are there people who jump to the end just to hear the thank you and the goodbye?
They might.
Okay, they're going to turn it off if we don't finish soon. So we'd like to come back to us for a second. So that was our first video podcast. I think it went pretty well.
I think so. I hope you guys liked it.
Yeah, and again, as we said at the beginning, don't forget to send us your questions, and please send us feedback at the Twitter accounts that we mentioned at the beginning of the show. We can put them down at the bottom again here.
We will.
Thank you for listening, and please give us feedback. We want to do these again, but only if you guys liked them and thought they were helpful. We hope you learned from it.
Absolutely, and feel free to throw whatever in the comment section, whatever on Twitter. You can use the hashtag #SusPaceJam, all one word, if you feel like that's what you need to do.
And also, if you want to talk to Steve Spurrier, he will be with us.
Before we say goodbye, Steve's going to say goodbye.
Bye.
That was Steve's hand, not mine.
Yeah.
All right, well, that wraps it up for today. We hope to bring you guys something after G-Day.
Yeah.
Coming maybe early next week. And until then, thank you.
See you later.